It's now time for this month's broadcast of Learning Now TV.
Welcome everyone, it's the July programme, so we're halfway through the year. Kate, what have we got on the show today?
Well, Nigel, now we've gone back to a monthly programme with chock-a-block, and we had to decide what to put into this show versus the August show. But you talked to Hira Ali about her new book, which I am desperate to read. It's all about how men can help women make a difference. Is that right?
That's it.
And then another book, Stephen Walsh, who is a long-time stalwart, I'm sure he won't mind me saying, of the learning technology industry, has written a work of fiction. So he is talking about storytelling, which is obviously very relevant for L&D, but also just the process of being brave and being bold and putting yourself out there and really chasing a dream, which I found really inspiring. And then Carrie Horvath and Gent Armitage are from Mind Tools, talking about their learning performance benchmark. And Michelle Parry-Slater, our regular, is talking to Stacey Lloyd from the Royal Voluntary Service about how she upskilled 75,000 volunteers.
Oh, so it's going to be a great programme, Kate, a really good programme. Enjoy it.
Today I'm speaking once more to Hira Ali. I spoke to her when she published her first book, which was called Her Way to the Top. And I really enjoyed that book, and it was about smashing the glass ceiling essentially. And now she's got another book which is very different. So Hira, just tell us the title of your new book and explain how you came to be writing it. I think that's a very interesting story.
Thank you, Nigel. Glad to be here again. The name of my book is called Her Allies, and it's a practical toolkit to help men lead through advocacy. The reason why I decided to write this book was because after writing my first book, Her Way to the Top, I would be invited to lots of different book talks and meetings in organizations, both in public and private sector. And then I would meet lots of people, and particularly men, well-intentioned men who wanted to support gender equality, who wanted to support women in their circle, but they were often clueless, they didn't know where to start and what to do. And then there were a series of incidents that provoked the final book coming together, because there was a horrific rape incident back in my home country. I had a book launch anniversary in which I invited a lot of D&I experts, and we had a good discussion about the role of media, organization, male allies, and the HR department in smashing the glass ceiling. And then finally, I met with lots of different boys from education institutes, and I also have a son who's 10-year-old. And I realized that a lot of them were, again, well-intentioned, wanted to do well, but didn't have specific strategies. So I thought, okay, here's a need for a practical toolkit which was going to help men. And I think post Sarah Everard's case and Everyone's Invited campaign, the topic of male allyship has been discussed like never before.
That's absolutely true. It's absolutely true. And the other side of the coin, you mentioned it in your book, is not men who don't know what to do, but men who are kind of scared to do anything. They feel that any intervention on their part could be taken the wrong way. And therefore there are people who could be actively helping who sit on their hands, who do nothing because they're, I don't know, it's too dangerous to walk into this minefield. But you've walked right in. And a quote from the beginning and a quote from the end of the book, if I may, the first sentence of the book, more or less: we need to encourage men to step up and play their part. And we need men to help us navigate a system and world primarily designed for them. And then right at the end you say, women need your support to effect positive change for women of every colour and race, in every community and profession, As an ally, you can help inspire others to stand up and be bold. You can help remove the roadblocks for women. So those two quotes, I think, sum up the exact context of what motivated you to write the book. But what you've done in the book, that's just a couple of sentences, is given very practical instances of what's wrong and what can be put right. So talk a little bit about that. What can I do? Give me a few things that I can do now that would, in your sense, unblock a few roadblocks or help smooth the path for female success.
Absolutely. So the content has been laid out in a way in which I encourage people to start with themselves. And I say, choose to challenge yourself and challenge yourself first, because that's always the easiest. And how do you challenge yourself? There are lots of different strategies, but some of them include acknowledging your privilege, acknowledging your bias, listening, not dismissing female colleagues when they do went out or shared that they have been harassed, not generalizing, not stereotyping, and of course, flipping the comment, any comment which you make to a female colleague or a woman in your circle, just flip it to test it and ask yourself, would you be asking the same question if you were asking a man? And this is a technique which is actually shared in the TEDx talk by this very famous author who also has my book right now, and she's reviewing it. And I think it's very helpful, because if you are not going to ask that question to another person from another gender or even from another race or background, then why would you ask a specific person that question? So flip it to test it, and then move on to challenge others. And that's the difficult part, because breaking the long-standing bro code, how do you call out people respectfully? A lot of people are victims of bystander apathy, and they feel that they should put their heads down and not intervene. However, research has proved that when men call out other men, the atmosphere just changes, and the incident suddenly becomes more believable. So how to call out in respectful ways, and sometimes you don't want to be directly aggressive, which is absolutely fine. So I have highlighted a number of strategies. For example, asking a reflective question, pausing, the use of humor, just so that the person is forced to, self-reflect and say, oh, well, maybe I shouldn't have said that. And then I
was going to say, you use humour a lot, and I think this is not a kind of book for massive confrontation. If you're going to take on the charge that Hira encourages you to, get out there and smash that down and challenge that and get into all sorts of punch-ups, you do it very gently. There are ways in which humour can be used, and just asking a question, just as you said, a little bit of reflection can completely transform the environment. You're quite right, and I think that's very, very important. And another example, when you talk about consent, which is really a loaded area, you talk about asking someone if they want a cup of tea, and that is really brilliant. And it's true. If I ask you, do you want a cup of tea? And you don't say anything, and I make you a cup of tea, I have no right to make you drink it. If you say, yes, I want a cup of tea, or you go, maybe, then there's a whole conversation there. And the way that you do it is, I would say, gentle and obvious and non-confrontational. And it just sows a seed in people's heads. Maybe I should think about that a bit more deeply than I would normally. So all good and useful, helpful stuff.
I would like to give due credit to the person who created that video on consent and tea. Her name is Emily, and she is the one who first came up with this video, and it was shared by the police, and it was, I think, translated in different languages too. But I think it's a beautiful example of how, if you can't force people to drink tea, then consent is very similar.
Yes.
I think it sort of really drives a certain point. And especially after everyone's invited to campaign, I believe that young boys and children should also be watching that video for sure.
Yes. So you talk about individuals. So there's a whole section of the book which is about individual behaviour, like my behaviour. I can recognise myself in that. But some of it focuses more on organisations, how you can change the culture in organisations, or organisations can create more sympathetic environments. So how does that work? What do you see has to happen in organisations?
important point to acknowledge is that I'm not expecting you to be a diversity inclusion professional. I'm not expecting you to be a managing director. Of course, if you're senior, then that certainly helps because, you know, senior leaders have more power to institute changes and influence the whole work environment. What I'm saying is, as an individual, whatever your level, whatever your department, you have the power to actually notice things and create awareness. And I think that's the important part. So whether it's recruitment or appraisal or compensation, even management of events, you know, there are so many events where they are just men sitting on the panels. And you don't want these homogenous panels. You want to ask the question, you know, where are women, or where are people of color, or people from the LGBTQ background, or, you know, different minority groups. What I do want to reinforce is that sometimes you might not even be in a position to enact that change, right? And that's all right. But if you're able to talk about it and create awareness about it to other people, and I think that's what is needed, you know, and eventually you might be in a position where you can make that change. So that's obviously going to be beneficial. But knowing what's happening, because a lot of times we don't notice these things because we're so used to not seeing them in a certain way that we hardly notice. And we're like, okay, this is absolutely fine. This is how it's always been, and this is how it's always going to be. So just, you know, observing how things could be different and what you can do.
Yes. Tell me why I should buy this book. Make a pitch. I'm saying it's interesting, Hira. Why should I buy this book? And therefore, why should anyone listening buy this book?
So I would say that as a grandfather, father, uncle, brother, husband, son, colleague, family friend, whatever role it is that you play in your life, right? Or even as a person who just wants to do good and wants a fairer world. In this book, you will find lots of different strategies which you can start from today and which are going to definitely help people in your circle and which will eventually impact, you know, children and your grandchildren and the upcoming generation.
Yes, I think that's right. And what I love in the book is that it's about awareness raising for sure, but it's also beyond awareness raising to taking action. And so it's know a little bit about the subject, suddenly see the world differently, do things differently. And that's fantastic. And your final sentence in the book is, as an ally, you can lead through advocacy and serve as a role model for other men. That's a great challenge, I think, a gauntlet that you throw down. So Hira Ali, I'm really pleased to have a chance to talk to you. I wish you the very, very best with this book. It's published, released at the end of June, and you'll see on the screen where you can buy a copy. You can order it in advance or you can buy a copy if you see this after the publication date. The very best of luck, and thank you for doing something that is a service to the whole of humanity, really. It's for everybody. It's for everybody. Thank you.
Thank you so much for inviting me, Nigel. Really enjoyed that. Thank you.
DPG's online courses are designed to fit around your life, so you can study anytime, anywhere. Get in touch now for more info.
I'm here to update you about the Learning Performance Benchmark from Mind Tools, known previously as the Learning Health Check. I can't do that on my own. I need a few experts who can talk about it much more authoritatively. And they are Gent Armatai, who is the Head of Research for Emerald Works, and Carrie Horvath, who's the Product Manager. So both of you, welcome. Gent, you're Head of Research. So what is the thinking behind it? What research have you done? What research do you think will emerge, which will, I guess, enhance the industry? That's what this is about, basically, isn't it?
Hey, Nigel. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the main things that needs to be noted is that the majority of the data that we collect, if not all of it, always is handed back to the community via reports, insights, dashboards. It's really a free resource for the community. When they go through the review, when they go through the learning performance benchmark, they get access to the industry, they get access to the size, they also get access to regional benchmarks. Based on their scores, they also get recommendations on how they can move across the maturity stages. In terms of research being done to improve the benchmark, we continuously look at academia, primarily journals like Academy of Management, Organizational Science. We also look at Emerald Publishing journals as we are part of them anyway. So in a way, we try to validate the measures that we use within the benchmark as much as possible, where it's not just our study using these measures, but also external studies validating them and in a way triangulating the results. It's a priority for us. One of the key aspects of the benchmark itself is always trying to understand impact. We know that within our industry, a large number of organizations do not clearly measure organizational learning impact. They firstly try to maybe define it too broadly or too narrowly. So one of the key aspects of the benchmark is to try and codify organizational learning health. Are we doing the right things? Are we doing the right things in terms of other competing people? Are priorities correct, depending on the maturity that we have? So yeah, there's research being done on improving the benchmark itself via measures and validating those. And the data collected via the benchmark is always provided back to the community via reports, interactive reports, case studies, dashboards, and just sharing of data, essentially.
Excellent. So, Carrie, you're product manager, you're in charge of the rollout. So what difference will I notice that I've been doing started with Towards Maturity, then I came through Emerald Works Health Check. What will I notice now with this great big kicking of the tires, really, a major overhaul? Will it still be available for free for a kickoff, and it will still be available through the web, essentially?
Yeah, I think that's one of the most important things to emphasize. As Gent says, everything we do goes back to the community. So there will always be a free version of the learning performance benchmark or the health check to the learning and development industry. That's really important to us as a business. In terms of what it will look like and what to expect, in some ways it will be the same in terms of the value you're getting and the data that's available. Like the questions are exactly the same. We haven't messed with the longitudinal trends or anything like that. On the other side, it will be an entirely different journey. It's been completely revamped. It looks like a completely new machine. It's incredibly modern. We hope it will be very intuitive for users. We hope, there'll be minimized sort of confusion in terms of what kind of questions are being asked, or what does it mean for us to ask these questions? What is it we're trying to get at? We've tried to make it incredibly transparent for our users. This information that we're collecting, it takes a lot of time. We appreciate that it takes, it's important for users to get value back in terms of the time they take to input it. And we've tried to make that really clear throughout the whole process. Graphs will be interactive now as well. Every element that you touch within the site, you should get value back from. We've added additional filters as well. So you can not only filter by the benchmark, but by your industry, your organization size, and your region. We appreciate that, you can be in pharmaceuticals, for example, you could be a massive company, or you could be a small company, and what you can achieve between a large company and a small company is very different. So we try to kind of breach for each kind of situation and get the most value back to you as soon as possible.
Will I be able to interact with it as a big data set? So I'm looking at my data. Will I be able to look and compare with the other industries like mine, or the whole gamut of data that you've collected, so that I can kind of get something from it almost continuously? I can go back to it to check against this. How do I measure up? Is this an improvement? Is this not an improvement? What is the average in the industry? Is that true? So it'll be a kind of permanent resource. So I put something in, I get an awful lot more back, basically.
Absolutely. We're definitely going for sort of longitudinal users. That's where the most value is. If you've not done it before, it's definitely of value to do, but you get more and more value year on year as you more
you put in.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I was going to say, how do you justify, validate, make sure that that what I get back out from what I put in is reliable, honest, truthful, and helpful?
there are a number of things that we do to make sure that our measures are validated. Initially, when we download the data, we clean it, transform it, make sure that we delete any data that is partial, therefore not completed fully. We also make sure that any data that doesn't fit a particular theme, i.e. if they have all 5s, all 6s, it's clearly that someone just has gone through it very quickly. So there is almost a system in place to ensure that if the time doesn't match the amount of answers, it's a flag, and therefore we try to ensure to take those away. Another angle that we take is that we do not accept answers that are not with email addresses from organizations, and very rarely do we do we accept those only if they are consultants and answering on behalf of an organization. So again, we have a look at those. We've actually grown the research team just to accommodate things like this. We have 3 people now on board, including myself. And as a result, we can validate the study and its conclusions together, but also independently to make sure that that's all correct. Last but not least, but probably the most important part is statistical validation. So we use a number of techniques that have been, of course, borrowed from academia, but are simply kind of state of the art of what people do in this case. We use exploratory factor analysis, confirmatory factor analysis, and all this simply says is all the variables that we collect, we want to validate the models that we use to tell people what to do. And if these models are not happening by default through the data analysis that we do, i.e. we run an algorithm, it comes out with the specific groupings every single year. And if these groupings are statistically valid and reliable across the years, then as a result, we can make claims, and we can make valid claims. So the model at the moment, for example, is made out of the index, 6 key areas that we focus on, and these 60 areas have 19 action areas, 19 measures that we look at. And you'll see that within the portal itself, within the Learning Health, the Learning Health Check, or as it would be known, Learning Performance Benchmark. So we try our best to make sure it's valid. Of course, there is bias, and we try our best to limit that as much as possible.
But you've got a lot of
transparency is key.
Yeah, and you've had a lot of time to get this right, and you're putting a huge amount of effort into improving this. So I congratulate you on that. So, Carrie, that surely means that we'll see more output, i.e. more reports, more detailed reports, more longitudinal reports, more interesting analysis emerging from better, cleaner data as a result of that. Is that true?
Absolutely. We're going to be keeping Gent and his team extremely busy with that.
Good. I'm very glad to hear that.
More insights we have, yeah.
He's had it far too easy in the last few years.
I've been slacking, Nigel. I should have, Kerry should have been here way before. But it's also really worth noting one other thing, which is we can provide as much to the community, as much as the community brings back to us. The more people do it, the more accurate the benchmark becomes. And these are so intimately linked, community and the benchmark, that is one of the key reasons for us to continuously push everything that we kind of own in terms of the data aspect towards the community.
So that Gent and Carrie, thank you so much for talking to me today. And I'm really excited about this prospect, and I hope that everyone who's listening will also be excited. So get stuck in. There's no reason why you shouldn't fill in that benchmark and get back a huge amount of useful data on how you're doing, basically, and what are the big standards and the big drivers for learning and development in 2021, 2022 and onwards. So thank you so much, both of you, for contributing.
Next up is our regular feature from Rob Clark at Learning News. There is a lot going on at the moment. It might be the summer months, we might be in a heat wave here in the UK, but that hasn't stopped the progress in our industry. So here's a roundup.
Hybrid working is about to impact everyone, but how well prepared is business? How will teams adapt to new, more agile ways of working? We ask an expert in teamwork. There's a significant rise in the number of workers who didn't receive any training in the last year. A temporary shift during the pandemic, or are learners becoming disconnected? July saw a host of acquisitions and investment activity across the learning sector. Learning vendors are hungry to expand in new markets and acquire new technologies. Fuse, Capita, Filtered, Learning Technologies Group, Open Sesame, Valamis and The Working Manager are just a few on the list. Learning News has the latest. We're all likely to find ourselves in a hybrid working situation, remote some of the time and face-to-face at other times. As well as advantages, hybrid working has potential pitfalls. How well will we adjust to new, more agile working practices, new digital technology and applications, and new face-to-face dynamics? Pam Hamilton is the author of Supercharged Teams and has developed ways to bring people and organisations together to solve complex issues.
We've now got a once-in-a-lifetime chance to reset how we work together, in the next year that we've never had before. A lot of people do ask sort of the basic frameworks, how many days is the right days to be in the office? How should you agree which meetings should be in person, which meetings should be online? Perhaps what we should be asking is, what is the team that you're working in? What is our main purpose? What are we working towards? And therefore, how should we consider how we should work together better? Now, this might be about empowering your teams to call out something that has been potentially difficult or has been potentially ineffective. I do think that over the last year, we've learned to really communicate with each other a lot more. And if you're not yet doing that, over communicate with your teams and with each other. It can only be good, because what you're doing is you're investing in that understanding with each other, which means that whether you're in person or online, you've got that built up trust that helps you work together better.
The latest annual learner survey from Callidus shows a significant rise in the number of workers who didn't receive any training in the last year, up from 1 in 6 to 1 in 4, and it found that half of all learners could not access the learning they needed. And on the flip side, we see there's an increase in employees taking control of their own learning, and that 2 out of 5 people will look for a new job in the next 12 months.
We've really started to see actually more of an exacerbation of the disconnect between learners and the learning on offering that's being given to individuals during this time of change. As you can see, there's significant disparate workforces with lots of individuals that, based on our report, are unable to access the learning they need to be able to be successful in their roles. I think the thing that we're really starting to see during this updated report a year into COVID is that if organisations don't focus on that upskilling and reskilling, they are going to lose that talent. They are going to move on and go and find other organisations to work for. And for us, I think that's something that we knew, but it's become even more apparent during this time. And I think change is not only happening in organisations, but it's happening with individuals and their perspective on the working environment.
Learning Technologies Group is to acquire GP Strategies for $284 million, LTG's 4th acquisition in 2021. The deal will result in one of the world's largest workforce transformation companies, with over 5,000 employees, and it's expected to complete in Q4. Fuse has acquired the performance support provider Power Guides and aims to take the majority of learning content out of courses and make it available at the point of need. The new technology will be released to the market later in Q3. The global consulting business Capita has taken a shareholding in the smart content provider Filtered. The deal will help Filtered scale its content intelligence offering to Capita's global customer base, where it aims to reduce the amount of time learning professionals spend creating content. And finally, Rob Call is stepping down as CEO at Callidus after 20 years. He's being replaced by Stephen Reed, who has a background in HR cloud software, a market Callidus has expanded into in recent years. You can find more on this and all of the stories in today's bulletin on Learning News.
Maybe we'll do that later. Hey, so you can see, this is just like using a whiteboard in a classroom. And then you do my 3-year-old's favourite, you just have a nice little wiggle. 1, 2, 3, rate it now.
A really quick question, you might want to answer this later.
You see, I love this.
I'm absolutely thrilled to welcome this next guest to Learning Now Television. I had the pleasure of working with Stephen Walsh a long, long time ago in a different guise for us both. He is now co-founder of And Is Pink, which is a curation tool used in, I think, most learning systems and learning platforms. You might have heard of it. And he also joins us in the guise of newly published author, congratulations, Stevens, of a book of short stories called Shine Variants.
Thanks very much, Kate. Great to see you again after all these years working together.
I know. So I think I was really interested to kind of get you onto the programme, Stephen, because we've always talked about storytelling, I think, sort of over the years and how that relates to learning and development. And you've had some really powerful narratives around that yourself. But obviously, it's next level then when you take it into actually being a published author. So how does one go from learning technologist to author of short stories? Give us a potted history.
I'll give you, but yeah, I think, well, I fell into learning technology probably like a lot of people in the industry completely by accident. I moved to Chicago when I was 23 or 24, and there was a job advertised in the paper for people who like writing, are interested in teaching and know a bit about finance. And I thought, when am I going to get a chance to tick those 3 boxes at the same time? That turned out to be an early stage e-learning company as part of Northwestern University. And I just started writing scripts. And I think, you know, as you say, it was a lot about storytelling. There was early days of goal-based scenarios and creating situations and giving people opportunities to make mistakes and learn from them and all of that. So that was Learning Sciences Corporation that's mid-90s. And I just stayed in the industry, you know, all through that time, always writing in some guise or other. So whether that's writing, you know, e-learning instructional content, or writing proposals as I moved more into a sales role, or as you know, writing. Yes, people would say early signs of fiction, making up stuff in blog posts and trying to get away with it. Did quite a lot of that as well. But that's been a strain kind of running through my professional life. I suppose the other part of the potted history is, in parallel to that, I was always kind of writing fiction, reflections, kind of notes to self, but you know, always kind of privately in diaries or just kind of scribbling it down. I never really did anything with it. And then about 4 or 5 years ago, I decided, after some kind of soul searching about what's next for me in my career and life, is that I wanted to try to do something a little bit different and try to bring that kind of fiction writing more to the foreground. So I took a little bet on myself and decided to sign up for a course, and then I signed up for a few more courses, and kind of through that really helpful but often excruciating experience of bringing fiction in front of strangers and taking it apart and putting it back together, I kind of slowly reached towards getting a collection. And then about a year and a bit ago, got shortlisted for a couple of competitions. I picked up an agent in London, which was brilliant, and then that into the publishing process. So as you say, last week on July 1st, the debut collection Shine Variants came out, published by Penguin. So it's been exciting. I'm making that a very potted history. There was a lot of agony.
Very potted, yeah. What a journey. I'm really interested in the kind of the going back to school piece. And, you know, everyone, you know, most people who watch this show are involved in professional learning, but are also, you know, self-professed learners themselves. So, you know, what you said, it was excruciating. Obviously, it's hard to put yourself out there and follow something that is maybe been a kind of behind closed doors passion or hobby. You know, most of us have something that we enjoy doing like that, but to actually put yourself out, what was that kind of learning experience like?
Yeah, I mean, I think you draw a really good analogy there, Kate, to this is this is about learning, and it is, and they say this in every workshop, and they're right. It's as much about the process of doing this as it is, you know, the end product, whether that's a book or any other creative pursuit that people want to follow. And what's interesting is kind of about a month or so ago, I decided to go on to kind of LinkedIn and tell people, my professional friends, my network, that I'm doing this. And I was kind of pressing, you know, publish on that, going, well, I don't know what people are going to make of this, if they're going to think this is just a bit weird or left turn. And, you know, I think this says a lot about the great friends that I have, and the nature of this industry that we're in, is everyone was so supportive. And so many people contacted me privately or publicly afterwards and said, you know, I have a dream that I'm, you know, not following, or I'm starting to follow, and maybe I will take another step towards that. Because I think we've all got that. We've all got, whether it's writing or something else, that little thing that's off to the side that we maybe want to bring a little bit more into the center of our lives. And I'm not saying I'm some kind of guru around this. I just took a chance and did it. But for me, it was just kind of getting over the fear of it, and the fear of shame, you know, of, you know, what if this is a disaster? What if everyone tells me I'm nuts and this is not good? And they might have, and I got plenty of feedback that was along those lines, but you just have to suck it up, absorb it, and get better. And I think that's what continuous learning is about. Is no one's going to come out of the gates with some new, you know, hobby or pursuit and suddenly be amazing at it. You're going to be not great for a while, and you're going to, with the help of other people and your own mindset, just try to keep getting better at it. And that's all I've been doing. And I think that it has been an unlearning. Unlearning is maybe the wrong word, but what was really refreshing for me was to, you know, suddenly be at day one of my writing life. You know, everything that I've done in learning technologies, you know, it certainly influenced me, but I was kind of the new kid in the class, and you know, nothing to fall back on except, you know, start from here and just show your work. And the phrase that we often use in this industry, work out loud, you know, other people looking in over your shoulder and saying that works, that doesn't, keep trying to improve. I think it's, you know, whatever you want to do in life, I think that's a good mindset to try to reach towards, to learn.
And it's often an overlooked part of learning, as far as I'm concerned, that feedback piece. It is, you know, to make that L&D analogy again, it isn't just about content, it is about that feedback, but it's also about not taking that feedback personally, isn't it? And I suppose I'm interested also in how it's informed. You know, you haven't just been writing a book, have you? You know, you've also been running Anders Pink. I mean, how has it informed your experience around running your second company, sort of post Kineo? How has it informed that experience?
Yeah, I mean, I'm fortunate to say that, yeah, I managed to keep the day job and be working with Anders Pink. We have Michelle in there now as a brilliant managing director, driving things forward. And as you said at the start, as a curation tool, you know, it's been a great year and a half for us. I think with everything that's happened with the pandemic, you know, it's everybody else in the industry will attest, more things moving online, the need for curated content that's, you know, relevant and in the moment has become more and more important. I think what I've learned about juggling those two things, you know, that the kind of day job and passion, is you need to have people around you who are very understanding and who allow you to kind of ebb and flow in terms of your time and your availability and where your energy needs to go. And I think, without trying to be too coy about it, as you know, any form of, you know, and I'm mainly doing marketing and promotion stuff around this thing, that's about telling a story as well. That's about a narrative. It's about where we are, what the challenges are that we face, and where we need to go in the future around content. And I think anyone, whether you're in L&D, you know, from a practitioner perspective, whether you're in a sales and marketing role, and I'm not the first, I'm probably the millionth person to say this, it is all about telling the story, and it is all finding the narrative and connecting with your audience.
And just in summary, I mean, we could talk about this all day, but in summary, I mean, do you find that the people who are using Anders Pink are using it to help build out a narrative or a story within their organizations? Because, you know, I've used Anders Pink in the past to curate all sorts of things around particular topics, and that might be building a business case or helping me write something, you know, personally or professionally. Do you see that from your users?
I think what we see them in the closest narrative analogy I would draw is the change in demand for skills. That's been the big story over the last, not just the last 12 months, but it's really come into sharp focus, is people in organizations realizing we now have everybody working remotely, and we don't really have any content in terms of a prepared course or anything like that to help people understand how, not just technically how to work remotely, but from a mindset perspective and from, you know, taking care of themselves, balancing life and home and family, and also managing and coaching people remotely. You know, these are all kind of new variations on skills that are, you know, we can say it's just the same on Zoom or whatever it is, but it isn't. You know, it's different. There's a different dynamic, and we all need to adjust for that. So we've seen a huge increase in the amount of content around those particular areas, and I think that's a narrative I've seen, is people realizing, yes, we need to respond to these things, but the answer doesn't have to be we need to build a bespoke course around it, because by the time we do that, something else will have come along, and we'll have, you know, the things will have moved on. We'll be missing something. So
yeah,
curating rather than creating, I think, has been the story that we've seen, and we're, you know, delighted to be part of that at Anders Pink, and help organizations plug those skills gaps and their competencies, and help them prepare better for the future, along with all of our partners like Degree, Fuse, Docebo, you know, SAP, as you mentioned, most of the key
most of the key learning.
Most of them, we're getting around to them, yeah.
Well, Stephen, I'm delighted to hear that the pandemic has been so kind to you on two different fronts. We'll flash up, hopefully, at this moment, some details of the book on screen, and also how you can go.
Shamelessly hold it up here. You know me.
There you go. Excellent. Excellent.
I am in sales and marketing, Kate.
Should have a stack of them behind you.
You should do.
But Stephen, thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Robin's back. Robin on leadership this month. And Robin is asking a question that I've asked as well, which is, why is leadership development the province of just a few people in an organization, and might not a much wider group benefit from leadership development, even if they've only got small teams, or even if they've got no teams? So they can help the organization develop the staff and generally grow together. So good question, Robin. I think it's excellent. Look forward to hearing what you've got to say.
Most organisations have leadership development programs or a leadership development curriculum. And in many organisations, regardless of the content, it's perhaps time to think about who gets access to those leadership development programs. A lot of the time, it's either people who are aspiring to move up the organisation and take on so-called leadership roles, or people who've already risen up the organisation and are already in leadership roles. And in actual fact, if that's the case, for the most part, these are not leadership programs as such, but management programs, because they are preserved for managers and aspiring managers. Now, if you're based in Europe or in the UK particularly, you may have been mildly aware that there's been a football tournament going on recently. And if, like me, you watch some of those games on television, you'll have heard pundits and commentators talking about individual players taking a leadership role within their teams. Not just the captain, and certainly not the coach or the manager who is constrained to the sidelines. These were players who, in those circumstances when it mattered, stood up, made decisive interventions within the game. They were leaders within the context of the game at that moment. It seems to me that that's not different from most organisations, in fact. We talk about people taking initiative, and we recognise that that is a good thing. But we don't necessarily recognise that that is a leading behaviour. It's the sort of thing where contextually people need to influence other people, they need to be decisive, they need to help motivate and provide a vision for where we're going for across the team. So in other words, they need to act like a leader. And that distributed leadership, as I describe it, is pretty common and has been certainly to the fore in my organisation as a result of remote working caused by COVID-19. So people have been left to their own devices a little bit more, left unsupervised in the traditional way at least, and required to act on their own initiative and manage their own output and their own productivity. And it seems to me that A, that's going to continue, and B, actually, it was always a good thing anyway. So how do we support people to fulfill that contextual leadership role? How do we support distributed leadership across our organisations, which is not defined by level or salary or seniority within the hierarchy? Well, not if all of our leadership development programs are exclusively the preserve of people who are already in management or who are already on a fast track to management because of some talent program or graduate recruitment scheme. It seems to me that all of the learning and development that we provide for our organisations needs to have elements of leadership development about it. And in fact, if we can distribute leadership across teams, then distributing leadership development more widely seems to me to be absolutely common sense.
Today we are with Stacey Lloyd, who is the Learning and Development Manager for the Royal Voluntary Service. And in this series, sponsored by Charity Learning Consortium, you know, we've been interviewing and talking to people from the third sector about the brilliant things that they're doing that we can translate into other areas of learning and development. Today, we're going to actually bring you a two-parter. The first part we're going to be talking to Stacey about is how she has deployed such rapid learning and development in response to the coronavirus pandemic. And then we're going to dig a little bit deeper in a later episode about how that actually took place. What was the work that was done there? So, Stacey, do tell us what happened. What is your story? Because it is an amazing story to tell about how you really did respond as a charity so rapidly to the need that was required in the NHS. Talk to us. What happened?
Okay, thanks, Michelle. So I'll start off with talking about the NHS Volunteer Responders Programme and sort of, you know, how it came about. So it is an NHS England initiative. So the NHS Volunteer Responders Programme is partnering between NHS England, ourselves, the Royal Voluntary Service, and a digital company called GoodSam. So between the three of us, our aim was to mobilise volunteers to get them out and about in their communities during the pandemic to support people who were isolating or shielding. So in that partnership, we took sort of individual responsibilities, and the Royal Voluntary Service responsibility was to recruit volunteers to get out and about and do the, you know, the great things that they do in their communities. So with that, we decided to start a recruitment campaign to try and encourage people to join up. That sort of started sort of mid-March, that recruitment campaign. And
that's March 2020.
Yes, March 2020, yes. So the actual recruitment campaign started on the 26th of March. So that's when we kind of turned on our recruitment form.
That was very quick.
Really, really quick. It was a really quick response. We've always worked with the NHS. We've worked with them since birth. So it was such a natural partnership for us to support them in this initiative. So the form went on 26th of March, and we were looking for 250,000 volunteers to sign up to the programme. 10 days later, we needed to switch off recruitment because we recruited 750,000 volunteers, which was just incredible, overwhelming and incredible. Yes,
unbelievable. Yeah. So you're looking for 250,000, you got 750,000, and your job was to make sure that those people knew what they needed to do. So your job's suddenly grown
Yes,
enormous.
Yeah. And it was even, you know, sort of in educating them at the very beginning of recruitment stage as to, you know, what am I going to be asked to do? What's my role going to look like? What's expected of me? Do I need to go out and about? Am I going to be kept safe? So it's all that sort of stuff that we needed to provide them and the information that they needed even before signing up to the role, so they knew what that expectation was. We opened up with 4 different roles, and those 4 are, I'll go through them. There's a community response role, and that role is very much focused on supporting people with practical things. So things like shopping, prescription pickups, maybe sort of going to the post office and posting something. So very practical support. And the second role was a check-in and chat volunteer, and that role was all about telephone befriending. So people could do that from their own homes. They didn't need to go out and about. Then the third role was a patient transport role. And this was to support patients going to and from the hospital for appointments, or if people were being discharged from hospital, to make sure that they sort of got home safely. And then the fourth role was predominantly to support the NHS. So it was called NHS Transport. So those volunteers were supporting things like local GP surgeries or local pharmacies with prescription collection and sort of bulk drop off in their local communities. So they'd be going to sort of several different locations to drop off those prescriptions. So those are the first 4 roles that we went live with. And that was sort of where we started going, okay, what information do these guys need to be sort of comfortable and confident in their roles?
Okay, so what I'm hearing you talk about today is how you've got a lot of people, but you've got them in very distinct buckets, if you like, very distinct roles. And what I'm really interested in is that link between recruitment and learning. You were very clear on what you were recruiting for.
Yes.
And consequently, I assume, and we should never assume, so tell me if I'm true in my assumption, you had very clear expectations of what they needed to know in order to be able to do those roles. Would I be right in that? Is that link between learning and recruitment really clear for you?
I think it was quite clear in terms of we really needed to explore what these roles needed. You know, some people were going out and about in their communities, some people were doing things from home. But again, because it was micro volunteering, because it was sort of, you know, it was all controlled via an app, so they wouldn't know who they were volunteering. They wouldn't know who they were picking the phone up to. You know, we needed to provide learning and provide all these different options and opportunities depending what, you know, issues our volunteers were faced with, you know, whose door they were turning up at, you know, who they were phoning. So again, we needed to really scope out those roles and the learning requirements for them and come up with different options for each of the roles as well.
But Stacey, you had no time. You did this so quickly. You know, we went from a pandemic starting and lockdown, and then suddenly you've got 750,000 people. So some of it you've already mentioned. Some of it you've said about it was a historic relationship with the NHS.
Yes,
it was knowing what they needed. It was working closely with them and being clear on the skills that were required for volunteers. But what else? What's the secret sauce to turning on 750,000 volunteers literally overnight?
So we started off at the very beginning by creating getting you started packs. So, and that was very informational. It was, you know, sort of telling them about, you know, data protection, what they could and couldn't do, safeguarding, how to keep themselves safe when they were out and about volunteering, you know, what were the basics of their roles and things like that.
You say basics, but so important. I mean, safeguarding, you can't mess around with this stuff.
No.
And I guess because you've got the skills and you've done this for a long time, all volunteers that you work with outside of this particular recruitment campaign need to do that safeguarding. So you were drawing on stuff that you already had, and that helped with the rapid deployment. Is that right?
Yeah, so in Royal Voluntary Service anyway, we have all these, you know, what we call compliance training, you know, mandatory stuff that our volunteers go through. So luckily, a lot of that could be sort of drawn on, and all of our volunteers, when they first join, they get something called Keeping You Safe and Legal Handbook, and that handbook is like their first step or first introduction to the organisation and to their training. So I could pick, you know, snippets out of that. but it just all had to be sort of adapted to be in this environment as well. So, you know, people couldn't go into people's homes, so it was less likely that they were going to notice sort of a safeguarding issue or something like that. So we did have to adapt it, but luckily that we had the sort of the, you know, the bare bones of stuff available from, you know, our typical volunteering training that we have available.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is start with where you are, start with what you've got, and build from that. Use the skills. You talked earlier about your skills, but you also mentioned about an app, and I'm hearing something around working with your best experts to be able to put something on quickly because you were all playing to your strengths. So can you talk us a little bit more about the app that you used?
Of course, yeah. So the Good Sam app is, it's been around a while. It's predominantly been developed to support cardiac arrests. So what it does is initially match somebody who is able to give support to somebody that's in cardiac arrest to somebody that needs it in a local area. So it's all based on matching in a location. So quickly, Good Sam were the right people for us to work with from the very beginning. And they developed a platform where we were able to take referrals into the system. So we had NHS practitioners referring in, GPs. People could actually self-refer into the system to say, I'm isolating, I need some help. And what the app would do is look for a volunteer or volunteer responder in the area that has signed up for that role, has got, you know, the right criteria for that role and has been trained and will be able to support that individual. So it matches up really, you know, somebody that needs help to somebody that's willing to give help.
So it wasn't even a learning app or anything like that. It was literally a dating app almost between somebody who was needing help and somebody who was offering help.
Absolutely,
so the use of your technology was very clever there. You didn't go for a learning management system or anything like that that would be pushing out information. You were actually using the technology in the way that would support the work that was being done. I think that's a lesson for all of us in learning and development. You know, often we'll chase the shiny new thing, but actually, what is it that needs to get the job done? And I think your story here is a real strength in that. Stacey, thanks very much. And next time, let's pick it up with thinking about, well, how did you teach 750,000 people?
Okay, thank you, Michelle.
Well, that's the end of the July show. We'll be back in August, on August the 26th. But it's a busy month, isn't it, Kate? There's a lot going on in the industry.
It feels like there's a huge amount going on, considering, you know, a lot of people would normally be knocking off for summer now. So there's been some news recently about Capita joining forces with our friends at Filtered, which is very exciting because it's almost like a David and Goliath situation. So really interested to see how they plan to kind of bring Filtered into their clients, especially, you know, very large enterprise customers. There's also the Go One funding, so yet another new HR tech, learning tech unicorn business.
Fantastic, huge amount of money being put into it. So they're obviously onto something. We had a good interview with Go One, and my fascinating news is that the Learning Technologies Group is going to acquire GP Strategies, and GP Strategies is one of the biggest independent learning development organizations in the world. Combine that with LTG, we have a colossus appearing over the horizon. And what about the program today? I loved your interview with Stephen Walsh, Kate. I thought that to take a work of fiction, but to show so much interest and learning, both for the individual in putting himself out to do something that he's never done before, but also some of the issues around creativity and engagement and so on. It's a really genuinely useful and interesting interview. Yeah, do you agree?
Well, of course. I mean, Stephen's, you know, I was lucky enough to work with Stephen many years ago, and always found him very inspirational. As somebody who writes himself, as do you, obviously, it's not always an easy process, but he's always been able to tell a great story. And I think there's just something for everyone in that interview, whether or not you're thinking about storytelling in an L&D in a corporate context, or whether or not you're thinking about chasing your dreams. I mean, it seems, you know, maybe a little bit cheesy to say that, but I think we all have those desires and those drivers inside of us. So to see him achieve that is fantastic.
I agree. Not cheesy. And let's talk about another book. You know, I really enjoyed talking to Hyra Ali, and her book's just been launched. And essentially, she wrote her first book, which was about how women can kind of break through. And she was discussing it in conferences and events. And men would come up to her and say, well, what do we do here? You know, what's our role? Or men would say, you know, I would love to help, but I'm just kind of reluctant. I don't want to appear to be judged by my actions.
Yeah.
So she researched and wrote the book about that.
And I think men don't want to get it wrong. I think that's
exactly.
There's a fear there. They don't want to upset anybody, even when their motives are good.
Do anything
that
could be interpreted badly.
Yeah, we've had a lot of these discussions around the women in learning movement. So I will be reading a copy of that book very soon and hopefully have some good lessons to share back.
So, Kate, that's the end of another show.
We've given everyone some summer reading, so go forth and enjoy what's left of the sun, everyone.
Indeed, and we'll see you back in August the 26th. Bye.